Hi, welcome back to Uproarious. I'm Rory, and today we're talking about happiness. Under the 5-emotion model, happiness is the first that we're going to dive into. The other 4 are sadness, anger, fear, and disgust, but we're going to focus on happiness today. Some of the things we're going to talk about today include what happiness does for us, what it does for other people, how we can recognize it in ourselves and in others, and what happens if happiness goes too far. First, let's talk about some general examples of happiness emotions. Our first subcategory of happiness is connection. Connection emotions help us build relationships with other people and reward us for building strong connections and being involved in a community or society. This is because biologically, humans need a community in order to thrive. The ways you might describe your feelings if you're experiencing connection include feeling warm, caring, feeling fond, liking someone, feeling attraction, whether that is emotional, psychological, or physical attraction. And then, of course, we have love, which is kind of the strongest of the connection emotions. The second subcategory that we're going to look at is appreciation. This is what happens when we see the world as it is and we like what we find. This includes any kind of looking for the positives that exist and any kind of reward that we get for finding positives in the world. Some examples of appreciation emotions include relief, gratitude, pleasure, humor or amusement, enjoyment, satisfaction, and relaxation. The next category of happiness emotions include any kind of interaction. So these are social rewards that we get directly for interacting with others or that make it easier for us to interact with others. So anytime somebody describes themselves as being kind, gentle, charitable, or generous, these are all emotions and actions that help us build relationships with others. And they're based on feeling happy in the first place. The last category of happiness emotions include celebration. This category includes any kind of being pleasantly surprised, successfully completing something difficult, or recognize an accomplishment that you or someone else has made. A few of the words that go under this category include glee, excitement, elation, rapture, delight, triumph, and pride. So let's talk about what causes us to feel happy. The cause of happiness is pretty straightforward. Even though it's a really big category of feelings, it's always going to be triggered when our brain appreciates something that we've done and wants it to happen again, or sees something that someone else has done and wants us to encourage them to do it again. A secondary cause of feeling happiness, especially love and affection type happiness emotions, includes proximity and time. Anytime we are very close to somebody over a long period of time, we're going to develop an affinity for that person, and we often describe that as liking them, enjoying their company, or even falling in love. The last kind of category we have for feeling happiness emotions includes having an abundance of something. It doesn't really matter what the resource is. It can be time, affection, company, money, food, shelter, or a sense of safety. All of these things, when we feel like we have a lot of them, they encourage us to be generous. And that happiness drives us to make other people happy. Now let's look at the purpose of happiness. When we experience happiness, our brain is trying to send us a very specific message. And there are a lot of messages that it might be trying to send depending on what kind of a happiness it's producing. Most of the time, the message is to encourage us to repeat an action, to continue a path we're on, or to build something new. If it's something that we've already done or done well, and our brain wants us to do it again, it will put happy emotions along with that memory when it is stored, so that we are more likely to participate in that activity again in the future. An example for prehistoric humans might have been enjoying a berry from a bush, and then making a memory of what that bush looks like, what its berries look like, and what they taste like, along with a sense of happiness, so the next time we see that bush, we will pick that berry again and eat it. As far as building new things go, it could be experimentation, designing a new car, a new creation of some kind, but it can also be building relationships or starting a new hobby. And finally, for continuing down a path, what our brain is trying to do is to get us to continue doing the thing that it thinks will result in a positive outcome. So this could look like a relationship, a career path, an educational path. It doesn't really matter. If our brain thinks that we're going to continue succeeding by doing the thing that we're currently doing, it's going to make us feel happy when doing it. Conversely, if we're unhappy trying to pursue a goal, our brain is less likely to reward us for trying to do that thing in the future. The last thing happiness does for us is it communicates messages to other people. Every emotion has some purpose that it communicates to other people, but happiness has very specific ones, and they reflect the kinds of messages that our brain is trying to send to us. When we're happy, we do various things which encourage other people to continue doing what they're doing, to build connection with us, or to experiment or be optimistic about the future. An example of this is if you see somebody on your team succeed in a goal, and then you get to participate with them in the next activity, you may be more inspired, you may feel more energetic or happy about being on that project because you're with somebody who you think is going to help you succeed. In that way, their happy experience rubs off on you and makes you more productive, and then you being excited to work with them in turn makes them more productive. So what does it actually feel like to be happy? Most people would describe this in their own unique kind of way, but what it comes down to is we have 4 chemicals which we always produce when we're happy and which affect us slightly differently. So the biology here includes 4 major chemicals. We have dopamine, endorphins, oxytocin, and serotonin. Now, dopamine is 100% reward. When we have dopamine, we feel really good about what we've just done or what we've just thought about. Endorphins serve a slightly different role. Instead of rewarding us for doing things, endorphins make it easier to push through stress, to clear stress hormones and chemicals from our body, and to make us feel more comfortable in ourselves. Oxytocin has a unique role in making us feel that warm, fuzzy feeling we have when we think of things that we care about or people that we care about. Oxytocin is often called the friendship chemical or the love chemical because it makes us feel connected to other people. Finally, we have serotonin, and serotonin makes us feel well. It makes us feel healthy. It's a bit of a reward chemical as well, so it gets tied up with dopamine in trying to reward us for things, but a base level of serotonin is required for us to feel like a healthy person. With those things in mind, the kind of happy emotion you're experiencing will dictate what kind of chemicals you have. Or you can look at that vice versa. The kind of chemicals your brain is producing will dictate what kind of emotional response you're going to have. If you're stressed and you come across a system or a method for making your life easier, you might feel relief. In that moment, you'll get endorphins. In a similar way, if you are having a really hard day, but then you have an emergency situation in front of you, and you get a rush of energy, and it's just easy to get things done all of a sudden, that's also going to be endorphins. If we're feeling good about something that we've accomplished, say something that we worked really hard on, or we eat something that's really delicious, we're going to get dopamine in those moments. Dopamine just is that pure bliss of reward that we get. If we're getting a reward that is for spending time with somebody that we find attractive or that we appreciate or that we value in some way, our brain's going to give us that oxytocin, social chemical, to help us make friends. Finally, when we have serotonin, we might feel like we have more energy, that we feel more capable or optimistic and courageous. Other ways somebody might describe feeling happy include saying that they feel warm, that they have higher energy than usual, that they feel particularly excited or particularly calm. They might also say that they feel open or willing to do new things. The word optimism is squarely in the happiness category because it's just that happy feeling we get when we think about the future. Next, let's look at what experiencing happiness makes us want to do. This category is called action urges, and this is just a response we have to any given emotion where our body has a response to that chemical or that combination of chemicals that says, go do this. First, we'll start off easy. Smiling or laughing are both indications of feeling happy. if we have the desire to hold something close to us or clutch it, touch it, or pet it, those are all indications that we may be experiencing happiness. We also have things like being kind, doing favors, and giving gifts, repetition of an event or continuation of an activity. And then finally, we have generosity, the urge to give away or to be kind with our time, our resources, or energy. These action urges go both ways. They're things that we experience and they're things that other people experience. So you may see people act on those things when they're happy. But other things that you might notice is that somebody might be complimenting you or asking for your time. Those are ways to indicate that they're happy with the fact that they're spending time with you. If somebody comes to you with something that they have made or wants to share a passion or interest with you, that's another indication that they feel happy when they're around you. And that can be really important because if you're like me, you might be a little dense and not always notice when somebody is flirting with you or asking to spend more time with you because they're doing it in indirect ways of just being kind or sharing their interests with you. And if you're like me, you just do that with everybody and then you don't understand why people think you're flirting. But it can also be really useful to recognize when other people are spending extra time on you and putting extra energy into communicating with you or sharing their interests with you, because they may have more of an interest in you than you previously gave them credit for. And to be clear, this isn't purely a romantic or a sexual thing. The same thing can happen at work when you have a new coworker or you start to make new friends. People tend to do the same kinds of things regardless of the type of relationship that they're building because we have very similar frameworks for getting to know people. Next, let's talk about the after effects of being happy. This can be really important to understand if you have a hard time identifying your emotions, because the after effects usually last much longer than the actual emotion itself. Some of the after effects of happiness include being courteous, friendly, or kind to other people. You might also find that you have a higher tolerance for anxiety, stress, or anger. You might also spend time reflecting on feeling happy in the past, or looking forward to feeling happy again in the future. You might feel optimistic or open, or feel just like you might be happy again later. It's really important to understand this because when someone is depressed, one of the things that they are missing is happiness, and that has a snowball effect. When we aren't happy for too long, it gets harder to feel happy. And so if we can introduce little bits of happiness into our routine or our approach to life, we can help kind of foster that happiness over time to make us happier over the long term. Next, with happiness, we're going to look at what happiness is affected by and what it affects. And this is really interesting for happiness because it kind of goes both ways with every emotion. So, happiness combats anger, sadness, fear, and disgust, and is undone by anger, sadness, fear, and disgust. This is because our emotional attachment, our sense of pleasure or joy attached to something, has a really, really powerful ability to override everything else we know about that thing. On the other hand, if our love for something is not so strong that it overrides pretty much anything in its path, it can be easily undone by anger, fear, sadness, or disgust. Of course, it's always important to understand how to use an emotion to improve your life. But let's also look at how happiness can be a negative for us. Excessive happiness tends to result in a few behaviors that can be quite damaging. The first is risk tolerance. The happier we are, the more likely we are to take risks, even if those risks are not safe or warranted by the situation. We're also more likely to overlook being mistreated by people who we have a strong affinity for. If we feel a strong love or happiness attachment to a person, we will let them abuse us, and we will justify it and excuse it because that love is so powerful. The next concern we have with experiencing too much happiness is addiction. Dopamine is a very addictive substance, and anything that gives us dopamine has the opportunity to create an addiction. This is how somebody can be addicted to something like gambling or social media. It isn't the same as the chemical addiction to, say, morphine. It instead is an addiction to a chemical that we produce ourselves, and we might learn ways to generate that create that addiction. And so people who get a lot out of social media or from playing the slots or from any other behavior that may not be healthy long term may repeat that behavior indefinitely. In some studies of addiction, mice were given a button which would make them produce dopamine, and then they were given food. And when given the opportunity, the mice would push the button for dopamine constantly, to the exclusion of all else, including food, until they starved to death. Humans are not that much more complicated when it comes to biology. We can and will destroy ourselves for something that we love a lot, and if that thing creates enough dopamine, it can be very hard to see how it's harmful. The last part of understanding too much happiness includes too much of a good thing. We've all heard that, right? If you're too happy for too long, it just doesn't seem as happy anymore. There's a biological basis for this. If we are too flooded or too heavily sustaining high amounts of serotonin, dopamine, oxytocin, whichever chemicals it is that you might be feeling in high amounts at that time, what happens is eventually we become insensitive to that chemical because it's there all the time. And so it requires more and more of that chemical to make us feel happy. And so we actually need to keep in mind that we need to feel some of the less happy emotions on a regular basis to help us stay engaged with our happiness. Over the next 4 weeks, we're going to go over the other 4 of the 5 categories of emotion. And when we're finished with that, we're going to revisit happiness. We're going to look at what it looks like to increase our happiness and what it looks like to decrease our happiness, and specific skills for doing both. Remember, even though there are a huge range of emotions in the happiness category, everything from kindness to love to joy to glee, they all rely on the same 4 chemicals. They all rely on the same internal interpretation of events that says that things are going well. So the same strategies for building or reducing happiness are going to work regardless of whether we're talking about love or attraction or happiness or generosity. If you have questions about happiness that I didn't answer today, or you have questions about what kinds of things might fall under happiness, feel free to shoot me an email at rory@arboreus.com. I want to make sure I'm answering everybody's questions, and I'll collect those and answer them later. I hope you enjoyed this video on happiness. If you want more information, check the description below. If you want to check out other emotions, they'll be coming over the next few weeks. Thanks again for stopping by, and remember to be kind to yourself and others.